inequality and inequity and injustice of the war on drugs. And the fact that those communities that have borne the brunt of over-policing, criminalization, and incarceration that has produced the largest prison population on the face of the planet are disproportionately communities of color. And Tucky was telling me a little bit about his story about being arrested and briefly going to jail. He said you were able to bail out, didn't have to spend a lot of time there in 2004. And you know, in my community in El Paso, Texas, or in my life as a white guy, there's never really a fear of mine that I would be stopped or frisked or arrested for possession of marijuana. We know that Americans across race and different backgrounds and ethnicities use marijuana and have used illegal drugs at roughly the same rate, but only some Americans are more likely than other Americans to be arrested for it, to serve time for it, to have something on their record that might prevent them from pursuing their education, finding a job, and you have to check a box on every employment application form saying that you have a conviction. And so this idea of addressing that at the same time, the harm that we've done to our fellow Americans. And Councilmember, you talked about communities that have borne the brunt of this. We were at a roundtable in LA on the same issue, and I've been using the phrase restorative justice. And this woman, Yvette, said, restore to what? What's the restoration? What are we going back to? When was this right? And she brought up such a powerful point that the criminal code in this country has forever, as long as we've been a country, been used to keep some people down by law. And so do we want to go back to that, or do we want something, in her words, that's transformative? Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm really looking for today. How do we transform our criminal code? How do we transform through opportunities, entrepreneurship, innovation, ingenuity that I just learned about here in what you're doing, and ensure that those who are most harmed by the war on drugs have the greatest chance to succeed going forward. That's the policy that I want to lead in crafting, and I want your guidance and help in doing that. So in advance, thank you for your willingness to be here, to share that. Bree, Tucky, Faye for hosting us here today, Councilmember Taylor for allowing us to be in your district, and everyone for being here. I hope that is all that I say, unless you have a question for me, and I'm very happy to answer it. Really looking forward to listening to you, and Lenise, thank you for facilitating the conversation.
All right, thank you. Kick right in, again, not that much time. Just to lay a little bit of context, the cannabis industry in its emergence, though it has, is not like it's not unlike other industries that have emerged that has faced issues with challenges with racism, such as in the tech industry we have a lack of funding going to black and brown founders, as well as the workforce being diverse in the areas that aren't the most the most low income positions in the company. And so I would say the cannabis industry is not unlike that. We saw this happen, the emergence of the social, emergence of the internet, emergence of tech. These are just things that have come about in my childhood, and in all of those, it has the same issues as the cannabis industry. And so I really want to take into consideration this whole conversation to make sure that we're not thinking about the cannabis industry as being something separate or something special, because there are people that are doing the work already in those industries that are trying to impact the systemic racism that has caused those realities. The cannabis industry is in the same system, is entering and interacting with the same infrastructure. And so with that in mind, having that conversation, knowing that the cannabis industry is a part of the greater problem. And so it's going to have the symptoms of the greater problem. And then understanding that it is layered with something different. The reason why the emergence of the tech industry or the computer industry didn't have such hoopla around equity is because they weren't, hackers weren't really getting too much, weren't getting kneed up too much out there, so there wasn't too much a decimation of a direct community pre-regulation. And so what we have here in the cannabis industry, because of the drug war, because of the enforcement of the drug war and what came of that, we have like a very like mirror in your face window of this is what's happened. But those are two separate things. Literally having the ability to say, you arrested me, you arrested my brother, you arrested my mom, now you're making it legal. That is one thing. That's separate of the issue of why are all industries that emerge excluding Black communities. And we have the opportunity here today in this conversation. We have folks from community groups that have nothing to do with cannabis. We have folks from that are elected officials. We have folks that are leaders of organizations or businesses that are heavily VC funded. We have leaders of businesses that are VC strapped, right? Or that are bootstrapping. And we have professionals who have clients and they get to see the aggregate of what's happening in the industry. They get to see what's your issue and what's everyone's issue. And so here at this table, I like us all to put on our hats, our social scientist hats. We're here to lean in together, to have a conversation outside of the narrative that's already been presented us to the media. We're separating the conversations. There's two issues that are going on. And with that, my first question is to, I think, Ms. Chris. And I'm gonna, what we're doing here is I'm gonna ask you a question. I think I want everyone to engage so that we're less talking to Mr. Beto and we're more just talking to each other. So like, you know, he can hear the chisme of our good conversation.
Yeah. It's not Passover.
Okay, so just considering you know everything that I said, that is the reality. What inspired or what were the pieces that brought together understanding the business model of the People's Dispensary to be at the intersection of creating equity in the cannabis industry, community reinvestment because of the drug war?
Well, I think for us, because we are for people that come from communities that have often been left out of technology or any of the major industries, when we saw that we were going to be really successful because we have a very customer-centric community involvement in our stores, we realized that we couldn't be successful without also the communities that were supporting the dispensary also to be successful. Because really, with the exception of several locations, most of the people that are making millions and millions and billions of dollars for companies are from the community that surrounds them. With the exception of maybe Los Angeles and then New York City where there's a lot of tourists, but still, that bread and butter comes from community. And so how can you make millions and millions of dollars in your dispensary or your manufacturing or your distribution company and not give that back into community and not through beautification of parks, which is the thing they used to sell us a lot here. What do we do to make it actual? So we decided as a group that we were going to give 10% of our profit into a foundation that can be used for 3 different ideas. One, rapid response funds. It's going to be less than 30 degrees. We need 1,000 socks for homeless folks. We can immediately deploy that capital without people having to do a huge grant. 2, micro investments into individual people that have a great idea, but it's not an IPO idea. It's an idea that will give them a living wage for the rest of their lives. So being able to grant that to them and not expect the money back. And then because we're people of color and because we're women, which gets about 1% of all VC or capital in the world, we don't have access to capital. So how do we create capital from the millions of dollars we're planning to make or currently making to reinvest into communities of color and not just through cannabis, but the big idea? There's a lot of big ideas in communities of color and Black people, brown people, LGBT people that don't have access to make the big idea. And so how do we make sure that we are creating capital to invest in them, that they then reinvest back into the foundation that goes back into the community and have this self-sustaining thing that doesn't require sandhill, doesn't require VCs, doesn't require for us to perform poverty for 501c3 grants. And so that was the reason that when we decided to move forward and become a licensed dispensary here in Oregon and move across, that was the foundation always. And the reason for that was because we saw the devastation in the communities that we exist in. We are from the communities that are being harmed even today. And the idea that there is an illicit market in California upsets me. It's not an illicit market. It's our community that doesn't have access into the regulated market because there's not a single person that I know Mexican or Black or Filipino that really wants to go into a dispensary with a bunch of people who put us in jail, which is why I always am eternally grateful for Blunts and More being the first, because they look like us, they are us, they come from our communities, they understand the terror we've been through, and I think that's really important.
May I ask a question? So Christine, when you were showing us the dispensary downstairs, talking about starting this business 9 months ago, and I was asking you how you did it in terms of capital, whether it's venture capital or being able to qualify for a loan to start this up. Part of my question came from the difficulty in having access to the banking industry, the systemic racism that's not just part of the criminal justice system or the cannabis industry, but just access to capital in this country, redlining, and many other ways where capital was denied to those who were unable to buy a home or start a small business. So what you just said may help me to understand this question. Instead of community reinvestment dollars beautifying the park or checking a box, you're saying that money is available as seed capital for potential entrepreneurs like Tucky and Bree, who are starting a business that may even compete with the business that you have. And specifically to people who historically have not had access to capital or the banking industry.
Because in cannabis, it's not about just one person being successful. In cannabis, it's about every Black and brown person being successful. And you have to understand what's happening right now in the U.S. They're closing the supply chain. You're seeing all these mergers and acquisitions, and people who have equities licenses for manufacturing of products will not be able to get to the market unless people like Blunts and More, People's Dispensary, have dispensaries that have that open pathway to make that happen. So it's super important that we reinvest in each other. Like, I was so proud of you guys, and I'm proud of them because they're the first. They are a model, and so that's amazing. We want that to be part of it. So cannabis is not, we only get 2 people. We only get Google, Amazon, or whatever. This is everybody. It's a $500 billion industry. Everybody's going to make money. Greed should not be here.
Thank you for sharing that.
No worries.
Thank you. That's a great segue. Thank you, Christine. That brought me to well, we have differing opinions. You are much more of a positive thinker. You believe that this $500 billion industry, like other industries that are $500 billion industry, this one will be the first one that is inclusive, and Black and brown people will be huge participants. I, a little bit naysayer, I say I look at the history books. I say I can't read on a paper, I can't find the date, I can't point to an industry that gives me example of that happening, and therefore I have to come to the conclusion that this will be like all other industries. And my work then, if I'm doing this community work, what's success? Why am I even doing it if I have such a bleak vision of what can happen? Well, I think about it, I'm like, well, if the ball is here, the end is here, I'm just one human, I could just move it here. That's success. And what I hear when you speak that way, I think and that's good. We need people that think that we can actually start here and move it here. And so I think that when we talk about supply chains and the soup of it, and it creates a lack of access for Black cultivators, brown cultivators, brands. We think about then what is the role for the outsider, and community language they say ally. Your business model is centered around being from the community. So I'm directing my next questions to both Ease and Nug. Your business models, although it has a strong value proposition of equity, there are still criticisms of many people, community, small businesses, other businesses, that would still peg your organizations as extractive. But I, on the other hand, have had the opportunity to know that you have spent the last, since launching, you really have been trying to put your head around how do I tackle this. And so I like to hear you guys talk about in your individual organizations. How have your CEOs and your leadership teams put on your social scientist hats to figuring out how can you, as white people that share the skin color, not you, I'm just talking to you. But I'm talking about as the representative that share the skin color of what Ms. Chris said, is someone can see as, the same as the oppressor. You're putting on these equity programs. Some people would not be sure of the genuineness of it. So when you came up with your model, first share what is your model, and I would just say, I want to, you try, what are the limits of so put it out there, okay? Put it out there. We're here to talk and be social scientists. We're not hating today, okay? We're just here for the love. Okay, no. There have been some people out there that have, rightfully, I can look at them and say, well, what are you doing to contribute to the issue? And they can't say anything. But yet those same people have criticized the model of NUG as being somewhat an homage to feudalism and or sharecropping. I know that there is plenty of options you could have went around to figure out how to use the role. You chose to use the role of, we have access to space, we have infrastructure, people can't get access to that. We're gonna lend our space out. So in a way, I can see as an industry, I see, okay, you're creating pathways. But then there's other people who are out there who are just like, oh, again, I'm not sure what those people are doing. So I like to know, what happened in that leadership room where it's like, this is the best social model that we can come up with. And then since you've been testing it for the last 18 months or so, what lessons have you learned? If you start your next company, what would you do the same? What would you do differently? And then, different question for you, because I know that you're in a leadership position, but maybe not the owner. What has been, what has East tried, and be like, oh, that worked, that didn't work, And if you guys are just gonna be going to a coffee separately out of here, and you're sharing notes, like you would about how are you gonna deal with this B2C packaging, if you're sharing notes like that, how are you sharing notes about how to be allies in the equity space?
Sure. So it was interesting. I think, Ease has been around for almost 5 years now. Started working more on the medicinal side, and I got pulled in more so because I had my own organization that was a compassionate care organization, and really Ease approached me as CEO wanting to know how they could be able to be supportive of that. Through those conversations, they just brought me in-house, which was great because it was like, again, be the social scientist for Ease, and how can you utilize our resources? And so really finding it was trying to figure out, through all the different community organizations, working with you guys, working with different other social equity working groups, a lot of cage-free cannabis, a lot of those folks really sort of advising us, here are the systemic issues. Obviously, I see it, as being a woman of color and having even been working in the cannabis industry for some time before Ease. I also had a personal stake in the sense that I really wanted to see it look differently. I didn't want it to necessarily look so much like the tech industry. I wanted to say, if we can start this, from the get-go and really change how companies are positioning themselves and not just be like, oh, yes, we're going to give you funding, but it needs to go way beyond that. And so it was more of me talking to the leadership of, this is a responsibility not just for us to be giving a certain amount of funds. We are VC funded, so it does definitely put us in a different realm. But how could we also be making sure that we're utilizing our resources to make sure that the industry is sustainable, in the sense that we're having more people that are people of color, that we are making sure that folks that are coming from or wanting to transition from the illicit market into the legal framework have success. If you look at right now, New Frontier data, I think it's 70 to 80% of all transactions in California are illicit. And the reason being is because there's there's the regulations, there's the banking, there's small businesses that can't make it, and Ease is just an ecosystem. And the only way that we were going to be able to even be successful as a business also is supporting those small businesses. if you look, we have over 100 plus brands on our menu, and so it's like, it shouldn't just be for companies who are able to be, funded well. It should be able to, like, we are launching brands who are literally not anything at this point, and they're able to do advertising. We're able to give them resources in terms of we lend our legal team, our marketing team, our HR team, things that they don't have, we can lend to these small businesses to ensure that they actually have a space in this industry. So I mean, that was like a big part of us, is like connecting the dots of like how we can be working together. It's not just making sure that Ease is sustainable, but it's the community in general. As she mentioned, like it's really like once you're having to make sure that everyone is together. Is like one person successful in one business, it's like the whole industry in general, because we have so many issues still to tackle, and we haven't even really we haven't even scratched the surface yet.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this opportunity first, and it's also to be clear, it's not lost on me my position here, and I am here as a supporter and an aid and trying to help push this forward, and I do not know or even understand the pains that your community has felt, so I want that clear. I have a long history in this industry. I'm a PhD scientist, and I founded one of the very first analytical laboratories in the country back in 2008, focused on cannabis science. And from that organization, I learned quite a bit about cannabis, how to make very good, high-quality cannabis products, and I have since spun out and started the business that we now known as NUG. We currently employ about 200 people here in the East Bay, and we produce products and distribute them all over the state of California. So when we started having the conversation here in Oakland about social justice within the cannabis industry, frankly, it was not an easy conversation. It is just not an easy conversation to have. But we were there at that table, and we did not push back and say, this is crazy, let's not do this. We were always taking the approach of how can we be involved and how can we support this. Since that time, what we have done is we developed what we call our incubator program, where we incubate 6 different equity qualified groups on our property. We did have space to do this. So we have constructed, and also let's be clear that the regulations that came out in Oakland say you in order to be an incubator, you give 1,000 square feet of space, rent-free for 3 years, with some other support, but essentially that's it, for 3 years, and then you get your license. And you could literally just mark out 1,000 square feet in your warehouse and say, here it is, and walk away. I mean, that's compliant, but that does not meet the intent of what these regulations and the spirit of what we're all trying to do. We've taken it a lot further. We have developed a very large 30,000 square foot greenhouse campus, and each group gets their own 1,200 square foot greenhouse on this space. These are all very sophisticated greenhouse. We're spending nearly $3 million on this project. It's been 2 years in the works, and we are on the last 30 days. We should be cutting the ribbon any day. Also, during this time, the groups that we're working to help get the greenhouses for, we didn't just leave them out hanging. I understand nobody expected it to take 2 years to go through this whole process, but during that time, we have given jobs to our equity partners, and these aren't just jobs of pushing the broom. We actually are, if their goal as a greenhouse is obviously to be cultivators. So we have these individuals in our cultivation team every day, and we work them through every different part of the team. They started at the clone room, and then to the bedroom, and then to the bloom room, and then to harvesting and trimming. They're learning the process all the way through. And now what we've done, some of the groups have gotten good and have learned the process, and they've taken it a step further, and they're developing their own brands. So we're helping them co-pack cannabis into their own brands, and we are distributing those products throughout the East Bay, trying to get their brands on the shelf so that when their greenhouses are ready, not only do they have the know-how to operate their greenhouses, but they have the resources through distribution, through brand awareness, and potentially shelf space to get those products on to market. So we really are trying to put our hands around this whole program and make sure that it's successful, because if the program is not successful, then we're not successful, and the industry as a whole is unsuccessful.
Next question, kicking it over to Councilmember Lauren Taylor. So we've heard from three different, people right now who have, we'll get to the rest, other people soon too, but they have, they have their approaches to tackling these huge societal issues through their business models. At least I say, business first, model first, then government. It's, and in this industry, it has seemed like a lot of folks have forgotten how movement and traditional organizing works, in which case we need a program, we need a model that is in existence, and they're looking to the government who has issues in just doing that to now do innovation and come up with these models. So my question to you is, how do you see your role in Oakland and District 6, understanding the pivotal role that Oakland is it for a case study, not only in the state, in this country, but in the world? I believe you have taken up the horns of the cannabis equity right here in Oakland, and so if I'm misspeaking, so as the leader now of this fight, what ways are you looking to support, to learn from these models? What do you need when you're looking to create an actual pilot in the government? What do you need to know from these programs? What data do you need, Trev? What outcomes are you looking for? Just something about that. Like, what are you looking for to be able to do more?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for that. And I think I do have to just acknowledge that those who have organized this have done an incredible job curating folks that are woke, are knowledgeable, and committed to this sort of social justice mission of the industry. So I wanted to acknowledge that in terms of who we have around the room, and also the fact that is not everybody. This is not representative of the masses. The reality is, and I know, Lanice, you spoke about it earlier, cannabis is not unlike other industries. And we've got examples from earliest days where the sort of black, brown communities have created, and their creation has been, whether it's the culture, whether it's the music, whether it's products, etc., has been disregarded and pushed down until it became popular and profitable, and then they were quickly pushed out, and others profited off of that ingenuity, innovation, etc. And so that's where we find ourselves with cannabis at the early stages of the industry. That's where we found ourselves with other industries as well. And it's not much different from the challenge that we face within city governments, local governments, around development of underserved communities. So the gentrification dilemma around, do we invest in an area which often creates a pressure on the market that increases prices and therefore pushes those who are native and historically there out? It's been underserved, it needs improvement, but yet do we go there, or do we continue to keep development away so that we can preserve and protect and buffer those who are existing? And it's that balance of how do we create development without displacement? How do we ensure that those who are anchored here are actually benefiting from the improvement, as opposed to simply being pushed out and displaced as a result of that? And so that's how I think about government's role, is finding that balance in a way that supports and protects those who are there, who have suffered through the lack of investment or the actual sort of criminalization, unjust criminalization, etc. So number one, I agree, we've got to focus and understand what success looks like. And that for me is important. What does success look like? How are we actually sort of driving that? Well, there was an interesting conversation when I visited NUG, where it was the conversation on, well, is it successful if you have one equity applicant who has a business that makes makes it and sells out, and then goes and does something else.
Hmm.
You've got one success that you can point to from the community, but is that really what we're going for? How are we driving those outcomes that was uplifting the entire community, the ecosystem that's there? So I think understanding that, what metrics we are looking at, are we creating the jobs? Are we creating the pipeline? Is it a true wealth creation for the community? Or are we just satisfying the 3 years, 1,000 square feet, and we're done? And is that really what we're riding on? And so as we look at policies in the city of Oakland relative to our equity program, obviously tying the success of our sort of target community that we're trying to serve and uplift with those who have capital, those who are coming in, is critical, because we've got to be able to incentivize everyone rising together. At the same time, we need to make sure that it isn't just lip service. We need to also make sure that we are actually capturing that data. As Lenise alluded, it's not just a matter of putting a program or a North Star out there, but do we have that feedback loop to know whether it's working? When you do innovative things, you've got to have that feedback loop. Otherwise, you go in a certain direction, and odds are you're not going to hit those goals and those targets that you're hitting. So we are iterating. We are working with sort of limited, scarce resources, just to be honest, within the city, but trying to sort of pull those things together to make sure that we get what we want and what we need. And from the federal government side, obviously, I think it's important that as policy develops at the federal level, that partnering with, engaging with those of us who have been on the bleeding edge, and the lessons that we've learned, both in the government as well as within the community that's been partnering in terms of driving that, is going to be absolutely critical. And so that's why I'm appreciative for you being here to have this dialogue and this discussion with us. And that obviously has to continue when we talk about opening up the banking systems, opening up interstate commerce, opening up these other items that allow us to grow and expand and create that. We've got to be sharing those lessons learned, that knowledge, et cetera, as we do try and uplift the broader community that has been underserved, as opposed to just one or two individuals as we move forward. So I'll pause there, but that's.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Can I jump on that?
No, but I actually do have, but I actually was segueing to you. We have 15 minutes left. I'm pretty sure I have this in my head mapped out. I'm going to you next, James, though. On that topic of keeping the feedback loop going, you have a unique position of being a lawyer, of having a huge sum of data at your disposal. You're not supposed to share, legally.
I know nothing.
But a part of that privilege of having many clients is that you get to see what is nuanced and what is a collective issue. And a part of that too, in this situation that we've created in this industry that is emerging and has all its plagues, issues of other industries, and then now it's compounded with the drug war. You have people who I would say otherwise may be good humans, may even be white humans that aren't racist, but now they are white humans that aren't racist, that have been placed in a economic policy, the Oakland's equity program, and now they feel like their hands are tied because they don't want to be accused of being racist. I personally feel like either you're racist or not, you can't be accused of something you're not, but that's different. And what we have here in Oakland that's playing out, and I think maybe you can speak to this better for people who feel uncomfortable, is what I would call like the sunken cost or value of money. We have the intent of the program, of the equity program, to really help folks go from having an idea or having a dream and be able to execute it. And the idea is that this money should be moving that. But what we actually, the reality is it's like there's a comfort zone and there's learning edges, just like in psychology. And if you're in the middle of the comfort zone and then that's you where you are, and the learning edge is growing a business, and then the grade of it is like running a hugely compliant regulatory, that's a huge leap. And so what we did is you picked, by definition of the equity program, we have chosen the most likely unqualified people, and this is a generalization, because of how they have been identified. They've been identified as growing up in communities that have been served. That resources taken from their communities, right? And so by definition, why would they have the skill set now to be able to run a company? So what happens is, the government made a relationship for you where a general's lifeline is dependent on equity's lifeline. Now, as equity, not all businesses are out there just handing over the space. Most 99% of businesses are handing over the space because they're small themselves, and they just have to check this thing off so they can get through the hoops. So now you get this equity applicant who has no ability to actually manage this thing, and then they do know one thing: hey, random light guy, if I'm not running a business, I can go tell Greg Minor I'm not running a business. Like, oh my God, I grew up in Oakland, I've been running businesses here. I love Oakland, I want to sell weed in Oakland. What do I do? Oh, I guess I'm just gonna now give you $3,000 a month to do nothing. How many of our businesses are doing that? How many of them are scared of talking about that being the reality because they don't want to be accused of doing federal crimes or something that is, I think it's an I word, I don't know. Anyway, that is sunken money. The value of that money, what do we do? And so I'm going to talk to you, James, like, how much money out there do you think is being wasted? You can aggregate that. Not that your clients are doing it. Your clients are not doing it. But
Thanks for the softball question. So I think you're right that you have to look at the whole thing in the total context and then kind of zoom into the program. So for me, the whole social justice and cannabis issue came out of as more and more local governments in California started establishing dispensary programs, and then we started seeing state licensing as legalization, adult use legalization started happening around the country. The first glaring issue was felony exclusion. Like, oh, you can't have a license if you've ever been convicted of a felony. So that was just obviously glaringly, grotesquely wrong, right? So getting rid of felony exclusion then raised the whole issue of like, well, wait a minute, who is going to make money is a bunch of rich white guys are going to get richer, while black and brown people are still sitting in prison for doing exactly the same thing, making money selling weed. And so then that leads, I think, to a very natural impulse to, we want to use the nascent cannabis business to address some of the historical inequities in this country. And then it's easy to forget that actually the war on cannabis and the war on drugs didn't create racism, right? There was plenty of racism before 1970 when Richard Nixon decided, hey, this civil rights thing, this hippies, let's get this under control. Let's have a Controlled Substances Act, let's criminalize these people, and you see this incredible explosion in the federal prison population. So really what we want to do is we want to address that issue. What are the underlying systemic, historical, structural reasons for racism throughout the economy, which has a 500-year history, and which, as we all know, now we've got this uneven playing field. And so we have things like equity programs to try to give people a boost. Anytime you have a government program that offers benefits, right, a license, a government benefit in exchange for some kind of equity program or any kind of compliance. I mean, you look at Volkswagen selling cars that have to have environmental controls, and they game it, right? There's an incentive always to game the rules. And Oakland's equity program is no different. So people are looking at it and trying to figure out how to work it with different degrees of sincerity. And I have no idea what that curve looks like. Like how many people are in the middle trying to do a good faith job, how many people are straight up came in out of town and said, okay, let's game this thing, make a quick buck, and see if we can flip it to some, Canadian stock market investors. Which, by the way, if you get an offer, man,
day one.
Well, okay then. You now, you're down for the cause, you're in for the ride. If nothing else, you will have an interesting story to tell in a few years.
Okay, you got 30 more,
So
45
it's
more
still,
seconds.
it's still capitalism, it's still bureaucracy, and that game is still going on. So legalizing cannabis has not disrupted it.
Okay, but to push back, how much money do you think is being forced through this equity program that is not actually going to the okay, let me put it this way. Okay, let me put it this way. I'll change the question.
No.
If all generals that need to incubate
Yeah.
are providing security and 3 years rent,
Right.
let's just aggregate how much money right there is being put into the atmosphere that could otherwise maybe, I'm not saying to end that program, all I'm saying is the value of that money.
Well, I mean, the average incubation at $3 a square foot is, $3,000 a month is $96,000 over 3 years, right? So how many licenses do we have in Oakland now? 100, couple hundred. So each one of those is, incubating. So 100 times $100,000 is 10 million, something like that. Somewhere in that ballpark, in the tens of millions, the low tens of millions.
And I just want to thank you for that. That's all I wanted was for Councilmember Taylor to understand that these white people that weren't even around when the government were sending police, sending DAs to catch, DAs to prosecute, judges to convict, correctional officers to abuse, parole officers to babysit. Those people that were those guilty, these random people who are now CEOs, they've invested more than the government, the perpetrators. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, moving on. Thank you for bringing out that math. So moving back over to Michelle, who joins us. Outside of the cannabis industry, there were I'm not sure, but I think the last time I checked, you might be. Your work might come out of an anti-capitalist frame.
Yeah, I'd say that.
And so considering that and considering the implications of what you're hearing here, just to share your thoughts. I actually don't have a direct question for you.
Sure.
I just want to know as a bird on the whatever it's called, fly on the wall. Thank you. And you have, I'll let you know. I'll be like.
Okay. Well, first, I am an organizer, so I always view things from that framework. And I appreciate some of the reinvestment measures that your platform that I had a chance to read over kind of addresses. But for us, at the Black to the Future Action Fund, we work about building political power for Black folks. So that's how can we do that? How can we do the education component? Because we can't wait for government to step in. We have to kind of build, I'll say an army, but we have to build the education around how to lobby, how to run different media campaigns, how to do direct actions all at once, so that Black folks are at the level playing field that other entities are not going to get us to. And so right now, one of the biggest objectives that I'm trying to run in this role as a campaign manager is to do a public policy institute. And so that'll help train across the country because our work is national. But it's municipally focused. So how do we implement an institute that will allow us to actually build this political power for Black folks? Talking with some of you all, I'm going to be reaching out, so look forward to my call. But it's interesting because I feel like a lot of this conversation has been more business focused because of the folks that are surrounding the table. But it's how do we bring that back to individual folks? How do we bring back that to folks most impacted who are going to get glossed over, that don't even know what VC means. And so how do we educate them about how to take action locally so that they can build that power and then move legislation statewide and then hopefully federally.
And we are going to wrap up phase, but I do have questions for everyone, so I'm sorry that I didn't keep it tighter to get everyone equal space. I would say, Amber, you're an interesting position. You're a hybrid. You're on one hand you're running a business, on the other hand you are running an organization of peer women business leaders, fighting for a space for Black women in the industry, or brown women, people women, and in the in the industry. When you got into the cannabis industry, were you expecting to do this much organizing?
No. No. When I got into the space, I just really got in because I wanted a job in cannabis. I suffer from lupus, so I know how much cannabis helps me deal with my symptoms, and I just wanted to really get in and make products for people that suffered from things like I did. And as I started to work and progress in the industry, I was realizing all of the barriers that I was constantly hitting, and it just wasn't fair. And so I banded with people that are like me to try and lower those barriers for other people that are in my community. And through that, I learned how to advocate on behalf of people in my community. Lanice has helped me quite a bit in learning how to go and learn going to city council meetings and talking to our legislators. This is all something that's very new to me. I come from a marketing background, but I'm also a military veteran. I was in the Coast Guard, and so it's learning all of these things and just trying to bring the whole team with me and break down the door and get everybody in as much as we can. And it's been an interesting journey.
I say thank you, and I would say the reason why I asked you that is to understand that, you know, like I went to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's alumni thing last year, and one of the things I learned is that it costs more to run a Black business. It costs more for insurance. It costs more for rent. It costs more, racism attacks things, you know, like, it costs more. It costs more to run a business in the Black space because not only do you have to run a business, you now have to fight and advocate for yourself for the opportunity to run that business. And so I just want to understand that too. We need more support for those that are out there. Bringing it back to Danielle. I love you, Danielle. Because you know how to yield your power for those you know that you are in partnership with, and you know you talk to what conversations are you hearing out there, the good, the bad, the ugly, as far as it comes to working. Again, my view is that the cannabis industry is going to be like all industries, is going towards big business. When the internet came out, we had AOL, printing, and I don't know. There were so many things. Now we have a handful of internet providers. I'm saying it's gonna get small. But one thing we can count on is that there'll be jobs. You know, and from your so there's all this pressure and attention to ownership. But if the cannabis industry is like any other industry, there'll be a top 3 that has 87+% of the market, and then everyone else we find comes for the rest. So why only focus on ownership when we know that's how it's going, and what's gonna be up with these jobs?
Yeah, I focus on jobs and workforce development. So most of the work I do is with white-owned and run companies. Two main categories to generalize. One category of white business owners is aware that they have white privilege and that their company is mostly white and that it's wrong for them to be profiting when Black and brown people are still incarcerated for this. And they have some level of awareness of that, and they can afford to pay for my services to help them attract and retain a diverse team. So the other category of white business owners are only doing it because they happen to operate in an area where the government requires them to hire a diverse team and meet certain requirements. In Oakland, it's the incubator requirements. I work a lot in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is actually one of the only examples we have of a government that is really putting a lot of time and effort and resources into trying to figure this out to create and sustain small businesses that are run by Black and brown people. I would like to see an industry that white ownership and management is a very small majority. That's what would make sense, because the vast majority of people, and they're still incarcerated, are Black and brown. So number one, how do we stop sending people to jail, get people out of jail, get them rehabilitated so that they can work? Some of them can have ownership if the government's participating and other companies and white companies are participating. So workforce development, who are companies employing? That's what it really comes down to for me. This is a long game. I've been doing this for 15 years. So who's getting the jobs and who's getting trained and promoted and who's supporting that? It's the companies aren't going to do it just because. And even like we've been talking about, they're going to work around whatever government requirements there are. So we need it all. We need culture change. We need to all be working together as a coalition of businesses and government. And essentially, we need to stop hiring white people. Just stop. Just stop hiring white people. Stop investing in white people. Just stop. If everybody in the cannabis zone just stopped and looked at everybody else and training and employing and giving them ownership, that's what we do. And I work with Denise on that. Thank you.
Make that happen.
Will you stop investing in white people? So lastly, I'm going to close out, of course, with our host. And I have a closing out question for you, and you can get some tag team it. As the first social equity dispensary in the world, what is something that you want other aspiring Black business operators in this space to know, and more directly to government officials, those people that are help make the policies, write checks for equity, understanding that your creation came of the Oakland Equity Program, but being that you participated in its existence, you are an expert to critique. So what if you were to make your own program now? You know what I mean? Very briefly, because we're closing out.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But what were some things you would do to capture your lessons learned?
I think that definitely we always speak about funding and education. I think that a lot of people in this industry and in this social equity program have an understanding of what they are able to do, whether they're able to grow or whether they're used to being distro. But running an entire operation is something completely different. And I think that they need a little more assistance in figuring that bigger picture out. And then also funding. This was a very expensive situation for people that didn't have any money at all. And so because of that, we're put into these predatory situations where people try to take advantage of the program because they have the money. And so if the program was in a position to actually bring us the revenue and the capital that we needed to start a business, then we wouldn't have to forge relationships with people that we otherwise wouldn't want to, because they're the only ones that have capital in this situation. I think that the program is an incredible start. I think that there's a lot more to be done, and I think that it's a great foundation, but I think that we need to focus more on making sure the program benefits the entire community. I think that this program benefits an individual, no disrespect to my partner, of course, but it more so it looks out for that one person who gets the license, and I think that we need to find a way for it to benefit everyone in the community, because everyone was affected. And so there should be funds. We pay a very high tax rate, and the highest in our area, but we're in the poorest area of the Bay Area. And so it's hard for us to reinvest into the things that we want to do, because every time we get healthy, we're paying it off to taxes. And so we need a little more support in that area, definitely.
Sneaks it out of here.
Definitely.
What I would say as far as government, come talk to us. Like this gentleman is doing, you know what I mean? Like, this is important for people of his stature to come and talk, to hear from us what's going on. You can't keep making laws. You haven't talked to us. You know what I mean? It just makes no sense. So I second everything you say. Education and funding is key to this program succeeding.
100%.
Appreciate it.
And we close out 6 minutes late. Thank you.
On track. target.
Very
Very,
cool.
very grateful to you, Denise, and to each of you for participating in the conversation and sharing. And Tucky, to your point, as we propose federal legislation and policy, ensuring that it's informed by people who have lived this, the success being the first in the world in terms of a social equity cannabis business, but also from your experience with the criminal justice system before that, helping us to understand the communities and the people who borne the brunt of the war on drugs. And Lenice, you began this so powerfully by reminding me that this is not something apart from the rest of the country or the economy or our history, 400 plus years and counting. That these challenges are systemic, endemic, foundational, and we cannot look at just one industry apart from the rest of the country. And so I keep that in mind as well, which just makes the solutions that much more challenging, but that's also honest about what we face as a country. Really love what the council member said about defining the metrics. How do we know if we've been successful or not? What was it? The one license holder? Was it the community? And I love your thoughts about what investment in a community might look like, and within the ecosystem of seed capital and sustainability and rent and incubation, and then success beyond the owners and the employees, and those are two important criteria, but the community at large, and then by extension the country. I don't know if I have, well, let me just say this, I certainly have not figured all this out, but I feel many steps closer to what some of those solutions are, thanks to what you have shared today, and would love to keep the conversation going. Would love to continue to learn from you as you move forward 9 months in, with many months and years to go, what answers that might hold for the rest of the country. So anyhow, thank you all very much. Very grateful for the time. Hope to continue the conversation and continue to learn from you. So appreciate it. Thank you for leading us today.
I would like to just, I thought you might cover it, but you didn't. And on the federal level, making it legal on the federal level, keeping in mind from a presidential position, what happens to the small businesses when it's open at the federal level and the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry comes in,
Right.
and you know where is the protection for the small business owner or the people of color? Where's the protection for them when that happens?
That's right.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say one thing about that, because you need to consider the economic side, the tax side right now. The consumer pays effectively a 40% tax in California right now, and that's expensive. That's expensive for small businesses. So it's set up it's made a perfect storm. It's already been only the well-capitalized can survive. Add taxes on top of that, only the well-capitalized can survive right now. And who has the money? We're back in that cycle.
Well, what it causes is the government to support the illegal market. That's what's
Right.
happening, because you're overtaxing and they can get it at a much better rate on the street.
And somebody earlier mentioned that between 70 to 80% of sales in California are illicit or
wonder
not
why
happening
that
through a
is.
dispensary.
Not going
And
back
so
to illicit.
you're helping us to connect the dots on
Right.
how that happened in the first place.
Right.
And also, again,
PH.
You know me.
but you were talking about consolidation and almost, and you said it perfectly, with history as a guide, it's almost a foregone conclusion that you will see consolidation, and there will be a top three that emerges, unless we are very conscious and intentional about not allowing that to happen, and ensuring that small business owners, especially communities of color, especially those who were harmed by the war on drugs in the first place, have a chance to succeed. What that looks like, I don't know, but it's really important to have that goal laid out and to understand some of the unintentional consequences of a high tax burden on making it harder for small business owners to succeed, and maybe unwittingly forcing more of that consolidation to take place. That is really helpful. And Faye, I'm so glad I know how to spell your name now.
Very cool.
Is that it?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all.